Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey. In this lecture we're going to build a very simple but very useful script to make an object look straight at the camera with various options. Okay, so we previously made the cutting counter, and when I place something, yep, there's a nice progress bar. So now that this is working, let's do one more thing. Right now, look at how the bar is oriented. It's looking quite a bit slanted. That's because we have a perspective camera and it's looking from top down. Now, this is one of those things that is kind of personal preference, so maybe you don't like it just like this. But a lot of the times you want these World UI elements to face the camera just like a regular UI. One example of this problem is, for example, let me pick up the cutting counter, duplicate it, and let's put one down here. So rotate it upwards. Okay, let's put it on 4.5, 0, and -5. Now if I place something on there and I cut it, yep, look at that, the bar is now inverted. So let's make a simple script to solve this problem. Let's go into our scripts, create a new C# script, call it look at camera. Let's go onto the cutting counter prefab, let's open it up, go inside, on the progress bar, let's attach this script, so the look at camera. Okay, now let's open. So from here, let's use an interesting function. So let's use a private void late update. So not update, we have the late update. So if this is the first time you're hearing about this, like the name implies, this one is going to run after the regular update. So every single update and all the objects is going to run, and then all the late updates. So kind of like you've got awake and start, you have update and late update. Why this is useful specifically for this script is because for this element you really want this to run, the orienting logic, you want that to be done after whatever that object does in the update. In this case, this object will never move, so it's not really an issue. But for example, if you had some kind of moving vehicle with a world canvas on top, if you had that, you would want to set the world canvas location to look at the camera after the vehicle had moved. Otherwise, the canvas would not look perfect. So anyways, because of that, here we're doing on late update. And now we can just look straight at the camera. So we can just do transform.lookat. And for the target, pass in the camera.main.transform. This function makes this transform look at another transform or another point, so this will make it look straight at the camera. Also, by the way, one quick note here. In some older tutorials, you might see people telling you not to use camera.main. The reason for that is because this field did not used to be cached, so every time you use this, it would cycle through every single game object in the scene until it found the main camera, so that was obviously really bad for performance. But nowadays, this field is now cached by default on the Unity backend, so you no longer need to cache it yourself. Accessing it directly just like this is now fine. Okay, so with this, let's test. Just make sure to save the prefab and let's hit on play. Let's go ahead, pick up a cabbage, put it up there, and if there you go, look at that, how it's looking straight at the camera. And for this one down here, same thing, cut it, and yep, there you go, both of them are looking straight at the camera. Okay, so that's great. You can also see exactly what it's doing if we try to move the camera. Again, we're using Cinemachine, so let's move the virtual camera. So over here, if I just play around with the position.x, look at that, look how, as I move the camera, yep, the objects are perfectly looking straight at the camera. So that's great, that's what we want. But also, you might notice one thing. Notice how the bars are actually inverted. Instead of going left to right, they're actually going right to left. Basically, this has to do with how the canvas by default assumes you are essentially going to look at it from behind instead of looking forward. So that is why when this game object is pointing straight at the camera, it's essentially inverted. So to solve this, actually quite simple. We basically just need to look in the exact opposite direction. But at the same time, sometimes we might want this exact behavior, having something look straight at the camera. Maybe we do want it to be inverted sometimes. So for that, let's make a nice complete script with all of our possible options. And for defining options, this is also an excellent way to learn about one more thing, which are C# enums. Enums are an enumeration, meaning a fixed set of options that you can have of something. So these are really useful when you have a fixed set of something, like for example, maybe a fixed number of options. So for example, up here, let's make it private, make it an enum, and let's call it mode. And then inside we can define all of our options. So let's say we have the regular look at and then look at inverted. Okay, so we have these two options in our enum. Now let's do a field of this type and expose it in the editor. So let's make a serialized field, private of type mode, and call it mode. Okay, let's save this and look what this looks like in the editor. And if we go inside the cutting counter and we look at the progress bar, you can look at that, the mode shows up, and it shows up as a really nice drop-down menu. So since we have a limited number of options, we've got a really nice menu where we can choose each one you want. So that's really awesome. That's one of the benefits of enums. They are really easy to use over here in the editor. Now back in the code here, let's decide which one to use. So on the late update, let's just do a switch on our mode. In case we are on the regular look at mode, then let's do exactly this. Let's simply look at it. In case we are on the look at inverted, for this we just want to look at the inverse position. So that's actually pretty easy. We just calculate the direction vector from the camera to this object. So a vector 3, call it dir from camera. And to get direction from the camera, we start from this object, so this transform.position, subtract the camera.main transform position. So this gives us the direction pointing from the camera. And then we just do transform.lookat. And instead of looking at the camera, let's look at the opposite position. So let's look at transform.position, so our current position, plus the direction from the camera. So we're going to be looking at the exact opposite point. Okay, so that's it. Let's test. And right now, by default, we have the regular look at. So let's just see it. Let's just place some objects. Okay, so right now it's still inverted. And something really nice is you can play around the enums even as the game is running. So let's go inside the cutting counter on the progress bar UI. For this one, let's swap from look at to look at inverted. And yep, look at that. That one is now looking perfectly. So this one is using look at, and this one using look at inverted. Okay, great. It's all working. However, yet another thing that is all about personal preference. Note how the visual has a slight slant. This is due to how the visual is actually looking directly at the center of the camera. So you can really see it if I move the camera left and right, how it slants going left or going right. Again, this is all personal preference. It's just a visual, so maybe you do want this look. But let's see another method. So over here in our modes, let's add two more. Let's add camera forward and camera forward inverted. And then down here on our late update, let's add those. So the camera forward, and then we have the camera forward inverted. So for this one, for the camera forward, it's super simple. Let's just take this transform, use the forward, which again you can get or you can set it, and let's set it to the exact same one as the camera.main.transform.forward. And for the inverted, exactly the same thing, except instead of forward, we do minus forward. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Okay, so here's the game with both counters. They're both currently using the look at mode. Now if I put it look at inverted, yep, that one goes left to right. Okay, great. Now if I put camera forward, yep, look at that. Now that one is perfectly straight. So even as I move the virtual camera left and right, look how that one is always perfectly facing the camera as if it was a regular UI element. And for the inverted, does the exact same thing, but inverted, so just like that. So that's it. These are the four modes. Again, these are all just visual elements, so pick whatever you prefer. For me, I'm going to be using this one, the camera.forward, so that everything is perfectly horizontal. So I'm just going to make sure to go inside the prefab, and on the prefab itself, modify it and set it as camera.forward. And now if I add a cheese there, yep, looks great. And if I add a cabbage here, and yep, it also looks great. Alright, so here we created a really nice, useful, generic script to make an object look straight at the camera in various ways. Note how this one has nothing to do with canvas or a progress bar or anything. It's really a generic script to look at the camera, so you can apply this to anything where you want it to look at the camera. Okay, so with that, the cutting counter is fully done. Now let's handle the trash counter in the next lecture.